Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. We are here to present an exhibition which has been very challenging for us. An experience that we have wanted to keep alive since 2 years ago. This is the second art exhibition of which we're very proud to present.
This is a very extensive exhibition. It was an ironic attempt. I thought that this is our small version of the floating piers, the great floating piers that Cristo structured on the Lake of Iseo, with the idea of creating floating piers within a space of 16 kilometers. We only had the memory of that design of the orange piers that was traced on the lake. That's the memory that we have from that art, that piece of art. Thanks to the extraordinary work of the Testori equipe, guided by Dall'Ombra and Radaelli, we give them an applause for their marvelous work. For our marvelous architect, Martina Malcamonica, I hope she's here. She did extraordinary work. The parallel with the floating piers of Cristo is not random, because it has to do with the theme of crossing. The exhibition has to do with the crossing from past to present. And this was the criteria for calling the artists. We didn't choose single individual works of art, but cycles, paths, journeys of art that would narrate a journey. And we are very grateful for the artists who decided to answer to this challenge. It is a sort of a path that is structured into stations that has to do with the relationship with the past, to do with the relationship, the anthropological relationship with the past. It has to do with the love, the affection from a past that allowed people to be the way that they are now in the present. One of the spaces of the exhibition is dedicated to showing how this love needed to take the form of a wound. To remain present, it was necessary for this to become reinvented, for this wound to be transformed. This causes for new prospects, new horizons, as we explain with the metaphor of Aeneas, who has as his aim the construction of the city and for his descendants. It is emblematic, the success, the hall of Emilia's Grog, and the book of the betrothed, which was the book that he loved the most. The public understood straight away that the words of Manzoni can be understood thanks to the interpretation of this artist. Adrian Paci will tell us about his contribution. The exhibition starts with an image, which is kind of an intrusion. The theme of the interstellar journey of David Boehm. This is a book that was published 50 years ago. It changed our way of imagining, our imagination. It gives the idea, why did we put it into this exhibition? Because it gives us an idea of what an artist feels when he starts to work. At the beginning of the 17th century, with Galileo, the invention of the telescope forced people to have a new idea of space and of the sky. Today, the stimulation of this imagination has multiplied, has become hundredfold. This doesn't mean that the exhibition has an excessive gaze towards the past. The exhibition wants to be a projection into the future and to treasure what the past is. A great critic that was very important for the exhibition, the great sculpture of Giovanni de Sì, for who has seen it, the great hand that sustains the yellow house sustained by the hand, which is symbol of the giant, which is the past, which holds the present. The house, which is the present, does not want to hide the present. It is a house which cries out. I hope that each hall that you go into, each room of the exhibition that you go into, be like a cry. That this cry be evident in every room. I want to conclude with one of the aspects of the exhibition which sometimes seems to be less underlined. And Umberto Buccioni wrote something very important, and he used to say, more than 100 years ago, 1914, there will be a time in which a picture won't be enough. It won't be enough because men will see a multiplication of colors and forms, and it won't be enough for them to be understood as forms and colors. They will be seen as huge colored gases. They will move and electrify a crowd that we cannot conceive. This is, in sum, what I wanted to say. The exhibition begins with a great coup de théâtre, a great work of Andy Warhol. This became possible because the last year of Andy Warhol's life, this picture was shown in Milan, and it remained in Milan. This work is here. Which is the work of Andy Warhol, the copy, which was inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. We have Miro Fiordi, who is the president of Credito Valtellinese, and we ask him to tell us the story of the Andy Warhol masterpiece. And Cristiana Collu, director of the National Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art in Rome, one of the greatest and most extraordinary director of museums. Adrian Paci on my other side. And I'm very grateful for him to have accepted to bringing his Way of the Cross to the meeting. I give the floor to Miro Fiordi.
Thanks, Giuseppe. And I think I also have to say thanks to the meeting. To be able to talk about art and not money and banks. This is a great opportunity. But my role here, and I'll try to be quick, because, and I'll be quick, I used to it's basically a story of circumstances and friendship. In the 80s in Milan, from 100 meters from Santa Maria, where the Last Supper was, there was a bombardment and we found a huge space in which the orphans would eat there. And we wanted to try and find a good use to this big space. It was a space of 14 meters. And an idea came thanks to a person who actually used to work in a bank. To use this space to accumulate a collection of art pieces. And he said we should use this place to use for contemporary art. And we used to think that this was a joke initially, but then we actually started to think about it. For us, there was something that exists for all businesses, but also exists for us individually. We must look ahead. But what is it that lets us to look ahead and can make us grow stronger? It's art. It's the passage of art. And so then we decide to initiate this activity. And so we decided to initiate this gallery in Milan. And so Giovanni starts to talk to his good friend Alexander Jolas. And so one time at lunch in Paris, he says that there is a big space 100 meters away from the Last Supper, and he says that there is a big space. And so he then calls Andy Warhol in New York. And gave him the idea of doing this this painting of the Last Supper. Andy Warhol says, okay. And so there was an agreement done by word of mouth. So he started working in his factory in New York. And started doing his silk screens and started working on this painting. And so for him, The Last Supper was already a global painting. And so it was already almost too perfect for his level of being an artist. And so then we inaugurated his painting in 1987 in the gallery. The authorities had thought that maybe we were a bit crazy opening this gallery. But actually, what happened? In Corso Magenta, 10,000 people had come. It was actually almost impossible to even manage all these people. This was a dream that Andy Warhol had always dreamed about. He was a man who had such sympathy and so precise in his work. Maybe not everybody knows, but he was taught about Catholicism by his grandmother. He was more religious than people had thought. And so he often did some religious volunteering, for example, helping out in a canteen and volunteering in the parish. So 3 hours before the inauguration, he was in the gallery, and he was just so enthusiastic and happy about the inauguration that was going to happen. He started to autograph the posters for all the workers before. And so 4 weeks after he had started a surgery, as this was the last exhibition of his. And so when the exhibition had happened, he had called them and said, "You have really made my dream come true." And the painting that is presented at the meeting is something of our property, as it is something that he thinks it is ours, not just his, because he had given it to us as a gift out of gratitude. So this was a moment of immense joy for him as well as for them.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Miro Fiordi, to have started. You will obviously see the picture, the painting. I'm sure you've seen Andy Warhol many times. And it has quite a surprising effect on one when you see it. You understand the greatness of Andy Warhol even more. Our culture is a superficial culture, but you can be deep at the same time while being superficial, and this is what the painting shows. The work of art shows. And this is what all of pop art effectively wants to express. Now we go to, give the floor to Adrian Paci. I have a very simple question. The work of art that Adrian Paci made in the area of San Bartolomeo in Milan, the church is a Baroque church. It's very dark. And I imagined Adrian Paci. I asked myself, why did he ask to do a way of the cross for such a dark church? What kind of journey did it brought you to this conclusion? First of all, good evening to everyone. This is the first time I speak to such a huge crowd. First of all, the commission for the Way of the Cross began in November, and I had to finish the job in March. And my first reaction was of fear. How do you create a Way of the Cross that is so big? And how can you make a Way of the Cross today? They wanted a Way of the Cross that was a photographic, made out of photographs. This annoyed me a little bit at the beginning. It provoked me negatively, because I didn't want to be the first to make the first Way of the Cross that was made out of photographs. I didn't want to be the first, and I thought that there was something wrong with this. And I said, I can't guarantee this. I'll think about it. But I need to think about it. So I thought, first of all, about what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to make a scenographic Way of the Cross with horses, soldiers, pillars, palaces, costumes. I didn't want to make a Way of the Cross in some way provoking provocative in a scandalous way. A Jesus with jeans and Mary in a mini skirt. So I began to think about how to go about this project. Since this is a story that has been told 2,000 years, and history of art has told this story many times. The objective, therefore, was to get rid, to bring this job, this task, to a light dimension, from a heavy to a light dimension, from a difficult to an easy dimension. And the first thing that I thought was to do the Way of the Cross in the courtyard of my studio. And I wanted to paint it. This photographic idea is not something that I want to try. I feel that that's a bit pretentious. I think the history of the church doesn't have to force itself into photography. Photography shouldn't be forced if it's not going to be useful as a communicative instrument. So when I start, I always start from the image of movement. So I began to design the scenes of this Way of the Cross in front of a video camera. I got a very simple video camera, and I asked two of my friends, who were my ex-students, people with which I share my work, Giovanni de Lazzari and Maciceri. I asked one to do Christ and the other the Madonna. It was quite a big request to ask Giovanni to accept to be undressed in the winter and impersonate Christ. He decided to accept anyway, and to be Christ. Can we show some images? Here we are in the courtyard. So here we are in the courtyard of the studio, and I was recording these scenes with the video camera, and I started to select the frames. And at the beginning I wanted to paint on canvas. Then looking at the frames, I saw that they had a freshness that through painting would have been lost. I decided to print these frames and rework them I'd print them on aluminium plaques. The church is quite dark. You only see the light when you walk. For some strange, by coincidence, a ray of light, random rays of light in the church give you glimpse of light, and the aluminium reflects and amplifies this light. For about 3 months, we worked on this project, friends, relatives, friends of friends. I tried to make a sober way of the cross, where solitude, the loneliness of Christ's suffering is shown, his fragility and his humanity. Very often, by talking about this, way of the cross, Pasolini comes to mind. He is an author that I met in Italy, and I found something amazing. He has a cultured memory, a very profound memory of the past that struggles for a true gaze on the present. I didn't want to quote him directly, but maybe in a spontaneous way, in an unwanted way, in a way that I didn't realize. This pictorial memory prevailed in Wave the Cross. I studied traditional painting myself when I was in Albania. There was a very harsh communist regime and studied only until Impressionism. So art is only studied until Impressionism. Everything that comes after is undervalued. So I studied very much Caravaggio, Leonardo, Vermeer. My gaze, therefore, was contaminated by this memory. But I tried to bring everything to the immediateness of the expression that I saw in front of me in the courtyard of my studio with my friends. And this is how these 14 stations were born. In the corner that you can see is an example of another work of art, Home to Go, which is a sort of a witness of the way of the cross. It's meant to symbolize the witness of the way of the cross. This is John between Emma and Laura, which are the 3 Magdalens. Suddenly, in the courtyard of the studio, I realized in the garage, which I don't normally use, had the perfect structure for the final station, the sepulchre. So in this empty garage, Giovanni straight away lay down. So it was a very intense job, but it was a work that had a great success from the moment that it got rid of that effort, that forcefulness that I wanted to avoid, that wanted to reach a heroic expression. I wanted to give it an ordinary, a daily expression, using places that were personal and familiar to me, and also people that were personal and familiar to me.
Before passing the word to Cristiana Collu, I wanted to ask a quick question with respect to this project. For me, It's one of the biggest witnesses that I've heard about talking about the way of the cross. Because you have brought the way of the cross in your courtyard, in your own personal studio. And you have identified yourself within this. Christ can also be identified by this white sheet that you have in your photos. The theme of the color is white. Was this a poetic strategy that you had in trying to keep this white within all your pictures? The work that I do obviously has some concrete symbols. This white is an iconic symbol that is seen in all of the 14 stations, which is then also stamped on the aluminium, printed on the aluminium. It gives us a dimension of movement. Even when we were in the church taking the pictures, the dynamics of the light was different. And this is a dimension that gives a very important effect, something very light as well. Cristiana Collu made a very silly joke. She said that she's not able to speak in front of people. She's someone that I esteem a lot. She's someone that I identify with someone who has the criteria to be a director of a museum. She is one of the 20 very wanted super directors. There was a museum that had happened in Rome, that I don't know if you've seen it. It was something that only 50 people had come to. She was someone who had always seen the antique modern. But she's always been able to make the combination between antique and modern, the fuse between the two. So when she was director of the Martoro Goredo, she had made one of the most amazing antique museum exhibitions. And so her goal was now that she had to curate something with the visitor being a man of today looking at the paintings of the past. She has this great talent for having made something so in the past and have a mixture of times. It was a way of The museum had a theme of being contemporary, which was called Time Is Out, the exhibition. And it was about enriching one with the other. So how did this investment generate from your idea? I don't know how to. With the Giuseppe's kind of presentation, I sometimes am embarrassed by being here talking. I think it's going to be very difficult to be at the expectation of what Giuseppe has explained to me. I don't know if I can say all these intelligent things that Giuseppe has talked to me about. There's this great poet, Mariangela Gualtieri. I belong to being, I don't know to say it, how to say it. Sometimes I think it is necessary to translate rather than do things. Even in the backstage of where I am probably most comfortable in rather than the opposite. I think there's also a bit of a contradiction in the invite of today. Because there are people that I really admire, Francesca, Davide and Luca, who have also helped me so much in this exhibition and the opportunity to be with them for these days. And it has been amazing to to be in dialogue with them all these days. The Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art in Rome has an exhibition of a collection which is called Time Is Out, of Joy. It is something that is almost it is a quotation of Derrida, and it's untranslatable. It is not a linear time. We are not in a relationship with time. Things that happen in time is out of joy. It doesn't govern in a chronological sense. The presentation of this collection that has taken up 2 centuries. And it is something that I've done without a strategy. Because before, when I was listening to interventions, especially the one of Fiordi, everything was able to be possible because there was a space for this event. Was it for the phone call that they did to Andy Warhol? All of this was possible. There is a canvas, but not a copy. And so we improvise on the canvas of memory. It's a culture that explains only the present. It is a canvas of our memories, identity of the culture, and the culture that we breathe. It seems like a contradiction, but I really think it is this. There is a phrase from Bourgeois which had talked about it is either about looking at today or looking at the past. When someone has a grasp on their present, that is when this is the time of that person. I really like the play of words that there is. That the play of words is that if we grasp the present, I really feel like we are embracing something, we are creating it. We make our own time. An heir is he who inherits and who can transmit, inherits a responsibility.
He inherits the responsibility of acting in the present. Many times the present, and we are blocked in this responsibility. Nothing can be transmitted in and for itself as it was in the past. It must be transformed. An heir decides that the house that he inherits, he can turn it into something else. He can knock it down. He has the responsibility of change in his hands. And with much, how can I say this? It is as if when I work with the awareness that of nothing that came behind me, but being in the present moment. One becomes an instrument. And I thought, I was very surprised. A reaction of the someone of the exhibition, time is out of joint. The relationship with the past in Rome is a very debated topic with the persistence of past, with memory. Often this is what happens in our life. Our lives are formed of people who see things in very different ways, of different ages, who we see things of different ways. And this defines the complexity of our world. Or our houses that we furnish with new items, and they have their own histories. So what happens in the museum? This space that we have finally, this space that is the meeting that can finally host some real works, has become a participant of this same dynamic. The responsibility that the fact that I am a woman poses the question of women's representation. This is a very debated and complicated issue. At this time, it is also of an urgent issue for me. in the exhibition, work by a German photographer is present with a German lady who carries her mother. And it is as if, thanks to Francesca, the women representation is in some way recovered through this work of art at the last moment in the exhibition. And this, for me, makes the exhibition sinless from my point of view. Thank you for the honesty of your point. The centrality of Giulia Cran is important because it is the first work of art that one encounters in the exhibition. And it highlights the theme of Aeneas, the weight of history, which becomes a source of anxiety for artists. The first work of art resolves this tension with an embrace. It's not carrying a weight, but an embrace. This is a key point in the exhibition. I wanted to ask Adrian as well. On the meeting, the newspaper, the meeting's newspaper, he gave a very interesting interview. You said during this interview, the important thing is not to understand, but to experience. It's not important to try to understand. This is sometimes our problem with contemporary art. We try to understand, whereas you say that the important thing is to experience, to have an experience. Yes. In fact, in the context of this interview, in interviews in general, it's difficult to respond in an exhaustive way to some questions. And yes, we do live in an era that tries to understand things quickly and straight away. But for me, I think this is important only within experience, or within the context of an experience. The other day, we were speaking about this relationship between understanding and suffering. In other words, understanding through suffering. To understand the things that you love. To understand, to try to go beyond the definition of the thing, the classification of a thing. It's important for the artist, but also the artist is not only he who wants to tell a story, but he himself wants to understand. That is part of the creation. It's a process that through which an artist can understand more. Many times I tell my students to never use the expression, I want to pass on the message, pass on this message through my work of art. No, you don't have to pass on any message. You have to understand yourself. We have to make works of art so that we can understand. it is a question of experience, which then can be an experience for he who is posed in front of this work after its completion. I wouldn't say maybe not completed, but let's say bequeathed. Not finished, but entrusted. I recommend that you go and see this work. That is very important considering your biography and the works of your father from Trapani. When we speak of inheritance, we speak about, in your case, your father was an artist, and in Trapani, you both exposed works of you and your father. Yes, this is an exhibition that is still underway until October in a museum in Trapani, in a church dedicated to contemporary art, born almost randomly thanks to a priest who studied art, who wanted to make a thesis, write a thesis on contemporary art. He discovered that my father was a contemporary artist. I had some of his sketches with me. Palmieri was the name of the priest, and who's also the director of the museum. So this promise to start to make this exhibition together was made, and it was a very beautiful moment. My father worked within this within the socialist realism movement in Albania, and all of the pictures have a tone of celebration. Apart from the sketches and the many portraits that I had, I always collected them since I was a child until his death. I was struck by how these sketches that were born from a relationship that was very free, free relationship with reality. This freedom was diminished in his last works towards his death. This dimension of the is the first part, the first, let's say, era of his work, which was more sensitive, more free. This last thing regarding Antonello, you have to tell us. Cristiana made an exhibition on Antonello 4 years after another exhibition that was not very nice, that was very much critiqued. But the eye of a director of contemporary art that works on a work by Antonello. How did you do this? This is what happened. You spoke initially about how it seems, how this exhibition seemed like a folly decision, a foolish decision. My idea to make an exhibition on Antonello began in October. Then in March and April, I thought I'm still alive and I'm still have this idea in my mind. I wanted to tell something new in that institution. I needed an idea. An idea, if only I had one, the famous aphorism by Lerch. That's what I wanted, that's what I had to say, that's what I was thinking at the time. I seemed to be in a dead end, but then I had two ideas. One was the Magnifica Ossessione, the Magnificent Obsession, which was an exhibition that I had a month later at the Marte. And then I need to do something with an icon. And what does it mean to need an icon? I needed an image that would cross time without time. And what came to mind was Antonello. I said this a couple of days later to the president of the Marte at the time. Our projects are like a tender branch that can't be exposed to the light because it's too early sometimes. But I wanted to entrust this project to him. My idea was to keep this intuition and to let it grow. For the education that I have, I began with medieval and late antique, late ancient studies. I wrote an essay, an article that will be published thanks to Time is Out of Joint, which said, in the works of art, the history of art starts in that moment. In the moment when you look at a work of art, that's when history of art begins. I wanted to put this exhibition of Antonello in relation to the idea of the portrait. It wasn't a separate element, but had to do with the complexity. Wanted to talk about the complexity of the world. And linked to the theme of walls, which we try to constantly break down, but then we find ourselves building again. We can only do this if someone else comes knocking on our door. The ideal of art can be considered as archaeology of the present and prophecy of the future. And so I asked an extraordinary professor, Ferdinando Bologna, to curate the exhibition. It was like putting two pillars for this exhibition. It's very difficult to describe myself as a contemporary artist. it is being a contemporary artist is like being a bit cross-eyed. I was trying to understand whether we could insert some unorthodox elements as well as the orthodox elements.
Thank you for everyone. Thank you, Fiordi, to have intervened. Thank you, Cristiana, for having accepted my challenge of talking in public. Thank you, Paci. I invite you to the invite that Cristiana had invited you to. To try and experience the art as present. No, let's invite Francesca, Luca and Davide here. I don't think we can add much else other than just thanking you guys again and the guests that are here. Martina, who had planned this whole exhibition. And Giuseppe Frangi. And so have a good evening, and I hope to see you next